Good morning. This is Mr. Mike for the Mechanicsburg Learning Center, coming to you from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, to talk about another Dino-A-Day. This is quite an interesting beast, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed doing the research to tell you about it. Scientists have always wondered, once the first dinosaur bone was discovered, what was the first dinosaur? Now, we know what the first dinosaur discovered was. That was Megalosaurus, but they've often tried to figure out, when did animals become dinosaurs? When did they evolve into something that was a dinosaur? And fairly recently, that date was pushed a lot further back. We felt that the first dinosaur was a character named Eoraptor, which was dated at somewhere around 231.4 million years ago. But then they discovered something in the 1930s, and it actually took them quite a while to study it and take a look at it and then figure out how old this thing was. And the animal that they now believe is the oldest dinosaur is something we called Nyasasaurus. This thing dates back to 243 million years ago, which makes this about 10 to 12 million years older than the previously number one oldest dinosaur ever, which was Eoraptor. Now, how do you tell how old a dinosaur is? You can't ask it, you can't look at it, you can't ask its friends how old it was or when its birthday was. You have to look at the surrounding rock, sometimes called the matrix, and figure out by carbon dating how old the rock is, so that when the rock was begun to lay down and the fossil that's sitting in it was laid in there about the same time, that's how you come up with how old these animals are. So, the Nyasasaurus dates back to 243 million years ago, and right now it's being thought of as the oldest dinosaur. Now, it may not even be a full-blown dinosaur. It may be classified as something called a dinoform, but right now, it's the oldest. It was discovered in East Africa, Tanzania, in the 1930s, and when the animal died and was fossilized, or began the fossilization process, it wasn't Africa. It was something we called Pangaea, and Pangaea was that big supercontinent that at one point started to break up, and pieces slid around on the tectonic plates and moved further apart, and suddenly here's something that became Africa, here's something that became Australia, here's something that became North America. So in the 1930s, it was discovered by Francis Rex Parrington. That's the gentleman that found the beast in East Africa. The thing was probably about 10 feet long, maybe about 100 pounds. We don't have a lot of bones of it. We have a couple of pieces of its vertebrae and a couple pieces of its neck. So we really don't know what its head looked like. And until we find a head of Nyasasaurus, we're really not going to know if it was an herbivore or carnivore, because we base a lot of that on the shape of its teeth. So 1930s it's discovered. 1956 rolls around, and it's finally described by a gentleman named Alan J. Charig. Wasn't a complete description, so it took even more time for somebody else to come along and do another study and formally describe the animal in 2013. The gentleman was named Sterling Nesbitt. Sterling had a team with him, a gentleman named Paul Barrett, a woman named Sarah Werning, Christian Sider, and they also listed on the paperwork a gentleman named Alan Charig, who was the person that described it in 1956 and had since died. But posthumously, they placed him on the description paperwork so that he would have some notoriety in helping to describe this animal. So, a long and storied history, literally, for this animal. It used to be Eoraptor was the oldest dinosaur-looking thing, or the thing that was closest to a dinosaur, 231 million years ago. Now we skip back to 243 million years ago and end up with Nyasasaurus. Now, as I mentioned, it wasn't very big. Here's a look at Nyasasaurus so we can get an idea how big this thing was. Okay. Interesting thing about Nyasasaurus, not very long, about 10 feet, it had an extremely long tail. Its tail, if you look closely, its tail was longer than the rest of its body. And if you look extremely closely, they think the thing may have had 5 fingers. I frankly don't know how they came to that conclusion unless they base it on an animal that it was closely related to, because we didn't have any bones from the fingers. They think it had 5 fingers. So here's our story of Nyasasaurus. As I've said, I've challenged myself to write some new dinosaur poems. Hadn't written new poems, what I call fact-packed dino rhymes, since many of these were published. All right, and we're celebrating the 10th anniversary in 2010 of my first published book, Dinorific Culture Volume 1. So it had been a couple years since I wrote a poem, and it's fun to challenge yourself to do this during our little quarantine. So, Nyasasaurus by Mr. Mike, soon to be illustrated by my son, Ethan. Since dinosaurs were first unearthed, we've always sought to know what beast was number one those multi-million years ago. Which animal was first to be a proper dinosaur? We thought we had the answer, but we've learned a little more. The ancient Eoraptor was the beast that held the crown, but now we're sure we've got one that preceded it, hands down. It's called Nyasasaurus, and turns out it's very old. The evidence is solid and compelling, I am told. About 10 million years is how much further back we'd go. From Eoraptor to Nyasasaurus, this we know. Existed on Pangaea long before the landmass split. It wasn't very big, so carnivores would prey on it. It was the 1930s when its fragile bones were found, but no one showed much interest, so the bones just sat around. And then, in 2012, its name was finally announced. The specimen's importance was officially pronounced. Now, since we haven't found its head, it's hard to theorize just what it fed upon, and so we'll just hypothesize. Its size was not impressive, like a huge tyrannosaur, but clearly it's unique, since it's the first known dinosaur. Nyasasaurus, brand new from Mr. Mike. Thanks so much. Thank you for sharing this on Facebook. Thank you for watching it on YouTube. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Mechanicsburg Learning Center and Mr. Mike will present another Dino-A-Day for your enjoyment. Hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.